I'm endlessly fascinated and curious about the world around us, about business, about politics, about the arts, about culture, developments, social issues, and the people. Most importantly, about the people that are shaping our future. Every night, I get the opportunity to have conversations, to dive into conversations with thought leaders, with change makers, entrepreneurs, politicians, and everyday heroes who unpack the ideas and stories that I think matter to all of us. What's the future of our economy? What's the future of our country? How do we build stronger communities? What can we learn from music, theater, sports, politics, the arts? How does policy shape our real lives? What does leadership look like, real leadership in today's environment? If it's interesting and relevant and topical and we're talking about it, you'll hear about it here at 6 o'clock on the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. I want to have real conversations, in-depth conversations. These are ideas we're sharing. This is the Brian Crombie Radio Hour. Thanks for joining me. Welcome back, everyone, to the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. I wanted to chat for just a few seconds after the end of this show with Stephen Adler talking about the upcoming Liberal Leadership Review at the Liberal Convention that's going on, because I think it was interesting because it puts really into perspective this review, but also the review of Pierre Poilievre. I think some of the reviews and or leadership contests in the past. And he talked about a few things that I think are critically important. He talked about how caucus needs to come together, how the party needs to come together, and I think we need to ensure that that leadership, whether current or new, ends up being that galvanizing force that brings a party together. And I think that's key. And his comments about how critically important that is, I think, are kind of interesting to hear from a Conservative Party that has eaten some of its own in the last couple of years, federally and provincially. He talked about how critically important it is for renewal. And I really wonder whether the Liberal Party has gone through the renewal that it needs to go through after the demise of the Liberal Party's government. Very successful with Dalton McGuinty, and then even a majority government with Kathleen Wynne, but then the big defeat, and then a defeat with Stephen Del Duca, and then a defeat effectively in the last election. And so, even though the Liberal Party has increased its seat count, its vote count fairly significantly, if you don't win, you got to go through some deep thinking, and renewal is a key. Doesn't mean you have to change a leader, but I think you've got to go through that renewal. He talked about team and how critically important that team was. I talked about this a fair amount in the conversation I had with David Peterson yesterday. And if you get a chance, and if you haven't listened to my interview with David Peterson, the 20th Premier of Ontario that I put on yesterday, and his thoughts about teamwork and leadership, I think that's helpful. And ensuring that you've got a leader that can create that team and that teamwork, I think, is critically important. He talked about how critically important hard work is, that you got to have someone that's willing to do the work, traveling the province, meeting with the people, and going to church basements and going into the different living rooms and meeting the people at the barbecues. And it's a lot of hard work, because that's what you got to do if you're going to reach out to and listen to the grassroots. And he talked about listening. Leaders got to listen. If they want to have followers, they've got to listen so that they get the followers. And so that's key. And then he talked about how critically important it was to get in the legislature. I think that's important. And so therefore, whoever the leader is, and I think that some of the people that have been rumored that are thinking about leadership that aren't the current leader have got the same problems. They're not in the legislature. And so, I think that that whatever the delegates do, they got to think about what's the best way to get a leader that's going to be in the legislature. Because if you don't have a seat in the legislature, you're going to be really harmed from your ability to hold the government to account, which is what's your job when you're in opposition, and to develop policies and argue those policies, to try to influence government policy now toward those policies, and or obviously to have an opportunity to present those policy to the electorate so that they know where you're coming from. So I'm not taking any position on this leadership review. I don't want to. But I've tried to put forward a couple of ideas that I would appreciate it if people that are participating in the leadership review would give some thought. David Peterson made a lot of good comments about leadership, and we talked about that yesterday. I think Stephen Adler has certainly got some comments that we talked about just now. Tomorrow, Wendy Seeker is going to talk about AI and innovation. And I think that's critically important because I think that the innovation agenda, the prosperity agenda, the productivity challenges that Ontario and Canada have been to a certain extent neglected and forgotten. And if AI is as important and innovation is as important as I think it is, as Wendy Sukir thinks it is, we need to have a provincial premier, a provincial government, and a leader of the NDP and the Liberal Party, as well as the Conservative Party, that really are focused on that. Because if we're going to compete in the world long term, we need to adopt AI, adapt to AI, and make sure that we're innovative, productive, and therefore hopefully prosperous. And so I think that that's going to be a really interesting conversation. And then on Friday, I've got Roberta Teverlin talking about electoral reform because I'm very passionate about the need for electoral reform. And I ran across her, got introduced to her by another liberal. She's just an activist. She's not terribly involved, but she's really working hard to try to stir up a lot of interest in passing a resolution in regards to electoral reform because she's convinced that the first past the post system doesn't work, and that we need to have some sort of form of proportional representation. And we talk about other issues in regards to electoral reform as well. It's a good conversation. So 4 shows this week, all sort of focused on leadership reviews, on leadership, on renewal, on where Ontario has got to go. I hope you listen to some of them. Thanks. That's Brian Crombie for the Brian Crombie Radio Hour on Saga 960. You can get all my podcasts and videos on my website, briancrombie.com, on social media, on YouTube, etc. Thanks. Good night.